I'm very happy to be here to talk to all of you. And I'm Rashmi Kusurkar, and I'm a research program leader with Learn. Lifelong learning, developing students for life is the theme of our program. And I work at the Faculty of Medicine, Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. What I'm going to talk about today is one size does not fit all. What is the value of a person-centered analysis in education research? This particular article on which my presentation is based was written with the audience of professional education in mind, but this topic is applicable to all education research or research in general. So I would like to start with, first of all, thanking my co-authors, my team. Yeah, we really enjoyed writing this paper together. And these are their affiliations. I'm going to start with in the introduction, I would like to first talk about what is a variable-centered analysis, because I'm going to put variable-centered analysis and compare it with person-centered analysis, and then explain what it means to do a person-centered analysis. So variable-centered analysis is the predominant type of analysis that is conducted in education research. And a variable-centered analysis investigates the relationships between two or more variables in a given sample. So how is variable A, the independent variable, related to variable B, C, which are the dependent variables for a whole sample? Now, educators may find it hard to adapt their practice on the basis of this analysis, as many studies focus only on a few variables, and the educational practice can be complex. So there are many factors involved. If you look at the variable-centered analysis, this is what your sample would look like. There are many different types of people in the sample, and what you do is you look at one characteristic of this sample and try to map it to other outcomes in the sample. You look for variables, how they are related for this whole varied sample. Let's say that we are looking at the association between motivation and academic performance of this particular group. So in a variable-centered analysis, you would look at the motivation, the mean of motivation and the standard deviation, and try to associate it with academic performance of the whole group. How is person-centered analysis different? So in a person-centered analysis, what is investigated is how subgroups of individuals can be made on the basis of how variables are related to each other across subgroups. A person-centered analysis generates findings that could provide educators tools to personalize practice initiatives. So what will it look like? What do we do in a person-centered analysis? In a given data set, we can create subgroups of people in such a way that people with similar characteristics or similar scores on independent variables are clustered or grouped together. This is type of a case-based analysis, that is analysis of individuals or cases with similar characteristics. For this, we do not need to create a different file type than what we would normally use. So starting with this again, if this is our sample, what we do in a analysis is take a characteristic of this group and divide it into subgroups. And then what I'm going to do now is divide it on the basis of its color of clothes, I mean. So if I apply a person-centered analysis here, this is what the data will look like. There is profile 1, which is where the clothes are red, profile 2, which is blue, profile 3, pink, profile 4, orange, profile 5, green, profile 6, yellow, and profile 7, black, brown, white. So what we have done is we have converted this sample where there are people with many different characteristics into different profiles, and we are going to use this profile membership as the independent variable to see how are these different profiles related to the outcomes or dependent variables. So if we are looking at the same relationship which we were looking at before, how is motivation related to academic performance, we actually make the profile membership as the independent variable and then test how each of these profiles is related to academic performance, which is a dependent variable. This is a person-centered analysis. The article that we wrote aimed how person-centered analysis can complement variable-centered analysis. So we are not saying that variable-centered analysis should be replaced with person-centered analysis, but it is a different way of analysis and it actually adds to variable-centered analysis. We also wanted to look at which methods can be used for person-centered analysis. And we wanted to look at how person-centered analysis can generate recommendations for more personalized support to students, faculty, and everyone involved in health professions education, in this case, education. So this is a table which compares variable-centered analysis and person-centered analysis. So let's look at the research question, how is empathy related to a clinical performance? The method for variable-centered analysis would be similar. The first part of the method would be similar to person-centered analysis. So first you collect scores on empathy and clinical performance. You do the same for a person-centered analysis. And then in the variable-centered analysis, you run statistical analysis for association between empathy and clinical performance for the whole sample. Whereas in a person-centered analysis, you run the statistical analysis for association between the subgroup membership, that is a profile, as an independent variable with the dependent variable. Now, what are the implications for the practice? So variable-centered analysis leads to general implications, and person-centered analysis leads to nuanced implications per subgroup. So in variable-centered analysis, if the association between empathy and clinical performance is positive, this can lead to evidence-based implication that training to foster empathy among students will help in better clinical performance. So we give a recommendation to the practice that please train students to foster empathy so that the clinical performance will be better. But with a person-centered analysis, if the findings show that the groups with high or moderate empathy, so if you divide the independent variable is empathy and you divide groups into high or moderate empathy, low empathy, etc., and if the findings show that groups with high and moderate empathy scores have good clinical performance, whereas the low empathy score subgroup has poor performance scores, the implication would be that students with low, moderate, and high empathy scores could receive different personalized training programs per group. So variable-centered analysis follows the one-size-fits-all model, whereas a person-centered analysis follows the one-size-does-not-fit-all model. So this is personalized. What further research can be done on the basis of variable or person-centered analysis? So in the variable-centered analysis, the further research would be for this particular study, provide empathy training to all students in the same manner and study the effects. Whereas a person-centered analysis, the further research would be provide tailored empathy training to different student groups and then study the effects of this approach. Now I would like to, I'm sorry, I think I have this table in the wrong place. I'm going to go to the next slide. So I would like to discuss 3 methods for a person-centered analysis. Cluster analysis, and I have 2 examples. It is Anita Jacobs from our group. She had performed a study in 2014, one in 2020. So I'm going to compare and tell you why I have chosen this example. And the second method is latent class analysis. And I think Mariana is present in the group, and I'm going to be using her article for this. And then there is Q-sort analysis, which was this study was done by Jan Willem Krijtma. I'm going to use that example for Q-sort analysis. So what is a cluster analysis? So when you study participants, when study participants are grouped together based on their scores or results on a combination of 2 or more variables, the method used is cluster analysis. This method can be used with all kinds of sample sizes. It tries to reduce the noise in the data by reducing the within group variability and maximizing the between group variability. I think this is a common thread in all the 3 methods, or in general in person-centered analysis, that when you start making the subgroups, the people inside the group or within the group are more like each other. So you try to reduce the variability as much as possible, whereas you try to maximize the variability between the groups. this is what cluster analysis graph will look like. So there are two variables, X and Y, and when you use both these variables to make the groups, this is what different groups will look like. So you see 5 groups here depending on the color. Cluster analysis can be done quite easily using SPSS. Two ways of conducting this analysis are K-means clustering and hierarchical clustering. I'm not going to go too much into details. And in SPSS, an additional 2-step clustering procedure can be used to suggest an optimal cluster number. K-means clustering is the most commonly used data clustering method. This method sorts cases in a predefined number of clusters. So from the theory or from earlier literature, the researchers can have a hypothesized number of clusters that they expect in a certain group, in a certain sample, and the method sorts it into a predefined number of clusters. And then, yeah, I already said this. An acceptable cluster solution should explain at least 50% of the variance in the variable scores and have an incremental effect over the cluster solution with one cluster less, which means that if the cluster solution which you accept is a 4 cluster solution, that solution should have an incremental effect over a 3 cluster solution. And you also have to validate a cluster analysis. And how do you do the validation? So cluster solutions, suppose you have a 4 cluster solution, it should be tested for stability. So you divide or double split your, I should say, you split your sample into 2 random samples and run the cluster analysis on each of these samples, and you should get the similar clusters as you got with the full sample. That is called a double split cross-validation procedure. And for a stable cluster solution, there is something called Cohen's kappa values. They should be as close to 1 as possible. Now, I'm going to give you an example. So for the method details, I think you can go to our article, and with the article, we have supplementary electronic information, and in that we have given in detail the steps to be used for each type of analysis. I would like to concentrate more on the examples because in this talk, I want to share more about what is the value of the approach or the analysis rather than what should be done in each type of analysis. So in 2014, Jacobs et al., they performed a study using cluster analysis in which there was a scale was developed by Anita Jacobs, which is called Conceptions of Learning and Teaching Scale. And this has 3 factors. So you can see this in the slide: teacher-centeredness, appreciation of active learning, and orientation to professional practice. And on the basis of these 3 scales, so she used these 3 variables, I can say. These 3 independent variables, she used the scores. These were continuous variables. And then she performed a cluster analysis in which she tested different solutions, which combined the scores of teacher-centeredness, appreciation for active learning, and orientation to professional practice. And the acceptable cluster solution was a 5 cluster solution. After doing all the analysis, she looked at what were the scores in each. There were 5 profiles, and you can see on the left, the profiles were named as transmitters, organizers, intermediate, facilitators, and conceptual change agents. These were different types of teacher profiles, how they look at learning and teaching, what kind of conceptions they have. And then she described these profiles. So a transmitter teacher is a teacher who prefers to transmit expert knowledge to students. An organizer is someone who transmits expert knowledge in a way with more active involvement, because you can see the difference in the scores in the 3 scales than transmitters, and helps learners to organize this knowledge. If you compare and contrast this with the conceptual change agent, then there the teacher-centeredness is very low, and the appreciation of active learning is positive, and orientation to professional practice is positive. So a conceptual change agent aims to stimulate and engage students in deep learning activities by reconstructing knowledge and conceptual concepts. So these were 5 teacher profiles that Jacobs et al. Found in 2014. And this sample was a purely Dutch sample. Now in 2020, Jacobs et al., I was part of this study. We actually collected an international sample of teachers, and we reran the not reran, I should say, on this new sample, we ran a cluster analysis using the same conceptions of learning and teaching scales, teacher-centeredness, appreciation of active learning, and orientation to professional practice. And this time, we actually, instead of finding 5 profiles, a 6-cluster solution fit our data better. And we called a new profile, which you see as the second one in the list, were neurotransmitters. And these neurotransmitters had scores which were between transmitters and organizers. So what we did was, in 2014, in that article, it was a Dutch sample. And after 6 years, we have an international sample, and we realized that in the international sample, there is an extra profile, which is called neurotransmitters. And this could be because of that over the years, teacher profiles have evolved, or that in an international population, you have an extra profile, which you don't have in the Dutch profiles. And in these 2 papers, Jacobs et al. Did not look at any outcomes, but I can suggest what outcomes can be. So what could be a further study from these profiles? So using the independent variable of teacher profiles, which is transmitters, neurotransmitters, organizers, intermediates, facilitators, conceptual change agents, actually we can, in future studies, we can look at how these profiles relate to dependent variables like student outcomes and teacher outcomes. And in student outcomes, you could look at, are transmitters more, do they show association with a particular student study strategy like surface strategy? Do conceptual change agents show more association with deep learning strategy? You can also look at how students are engaged in learning. Is the engagement in learning better with conceptual change agents or with transmitters? You could also look at, do these teacher profiles also give rise to different student academic performance? So these are student outcomes on one hand. On the other hand, we can look at teacher outcomes. Are any of these profiles differentially related to teacher identity? Are they also, and one of the basic hypotheses of which Anita Jacobs had when she performed this study was that each teacher profile will have a different faculty development need, and then we need to customize faculty development courses depending on what kind of profile they have. So, but that study has not been done. So that could be a future study where we look at, is each teacher profile related or associated with different needs for faculty development. This was cluster analysis, and I think I have not changed the label is not correct here. This should be latent class analysis. So this is the second method which I'm going to talk about. So latent class analysis is an exploratory statistical technique that aims at forming subgroups, classes, or clusters of the samples included in a study based on observed indicators of these samples. And if you look at the picture of the sand dunes, it is basically in a desert, you are looking for different types of sand dunes on a characteristic which is not very clearly seen. It can be used with categorical data. So cluster analysis needs to be used, can be used with continuous as well as categorical data. And latent class analysis can be used with categorical data. I'm just quickly going to confirm what I said. Yeah. And the output of latent class analysis is a hypothesized combination of indicators. So it is hypothesized. You can't say that someone definitely belongs to this class. It is a hypothesized placement in a certain class. Again, this is latent class analysis, not cluster analysis. Please forgive me for the wrong labeling. Latent class analysis is a flexible method, as the best fitting model is established by testing several combinations of numbers of classes. It can be used using the software programs R6 or Latent Gold 7, so you cannot do it with SPSS. And latent class analysis can be used if there exists a still unknown so-called latent variable that can be used to make subgroups of different of the samples under investigation. This newly emerging variable can be identified as a distinguishing factor for the content of the subgroups. The researchers then determine if the distinguishing factor has practical relevance and attribute a meaningful description and name to it. So an important thing or difference between cluster analysis and latent class analysis is that latent class analysis can give information about a latent variable which becomes obvious after you do the classification. I'm going to give an example of Mariana's study which she did, and what we did in this study, we looked at, we took students who had got unprofessional behavior judgment. So when they are following their different classes and also during the clinical clerkships that they have. And actually this work we did was in the bachelor students, so it was not about clinical clerkships. So among these students, what we found was we looked at people who had got an unprofessional behavior judgment, and we looked at the feedback given by teachers. And in that, we did a qualitative analysis where we tried to make themes of the different unprofessional behaviors. For example, someone would be coming late to class all the time, or someone would not be actively participating in the class. So we made different themes. On the basis of these themes, we actually categorized the data in, or I should say, we converted it into categorical data. For example, on the basis of literature and on the basis of the thematic analysis of the qualitative data from the feedback forms, we made a list of characteristics like coming late. And then each student we looked at, is this particular characteristic seen in a student? So yes or no. So our categories were yes or no. So for each type of behavior, we converted into a category, present or not present. And on this, after making this data set, we ran the latent class analysis, which is based on categorical data. And when we looked at the final number of profiles which we accepted was 3 profiles, which you can see here. And the main, variables on the basis of which we made this classification were capability for self-improvement and adaptability, difficulty of remediation. So these were 2 main things. And on the basis of that, our profiles were called Profile 1, poor reliability, Profile 2, poor reliability and poor insight, and Profile 3, poor reliability, poor insight, and poor adaptability. So you can see that on the basis of 2 main variables, capacity for self-improvement and adaptability, and difficulty of remediation, which was different in the 3 subgroups, we made 3 different profiles. And then on the basis of this, you can look at the people who are, so what cluster latent class analysis does is it says what is the probability of a certain individual to belong to profile 1 or profile 2 or profile 3. And then on the basis of this, you can pick out the top 10 people who belong in each profile, or which decide what the profile looks like. And then you can define a prototype. And on the prototype, you make a description. And the description looks like this. So what Mariana did was, she looked at the prototypes in profile A, and then she made a description of this profile. She looked at prototypes in profile 2 and made a description. And this is profile 3. And then you see that these 2, capacity for self-improvement and adaptability and difficulty of remediation, are clearly seen in the description of these profiles. So this is how latent class analysis is done. Then I go to the third method, which is Q-sort analysis. And a Q-sort analysis is a methodological or a Q-methodological study starts with the development of a set of statements on a topic. That is the Q-set. Now, so on the basis of literature, you develop, first of all, some statements, let's say 50 statements. This set of statements can be created as a result of interviewing. So you can either use the literature, or you can interview stakeholders, you can use theory, you can use focus groups. So you can use different methods which give you the information for making the set of statements. Now, each participant who is included in the study sort statements in a grid, which is called a Q sort, with most statements placed in the middle and the fewest placed at the edges, which forms a bell-shaped curve. Using the Q sorting procedure, usually the Q sorting procedure is followed by a post-sorting interview or survey question. So each participant is either asked extra questions to explain why they made a certain choice either through an interview or through a survey. And in this post-sorting interview, the participant elaborates on the reasons and stories behind the Q sort, and this enriches the data collected from the Q sort. The data is then sorted using factor analysis into profiles or factors. This is what it looks like. So let's say you have prepared a set of statements, let's say 50 statements or 48 statements, and the participant is asked to put these in a Q sort grid, which you see in the second picture. And there, on one side, you have least important or don't agree, and on the other side, you have most important or completely agree. And this is a forced ranking. So you're basically forcing participants to rank. Even if they feel two statements are equal, they need to rank them in a different way. So they have to use their gut feel. They shouldn't think too much and quickly place things along the grid. After that, they are asked questions about, okay, why did you place factor 17 in this position? I saw that you placed factor 1 first in the second position, but then you shifted it to the last position. So why did you do that? So you try to understand the participants' motivations behind doing a certain thing. And after all this data is collected, then you subject this to a factor analysis. And on the basis of this Q sort analysis, Jan Willem, who's the example of the article that I'm giving, he looked at the role of students. If you look on the left side, the role of students, what is the idea of these students on what should be the role of students? Oh, sorry, I should give you a little bit background of what the study was about. The study was about students who study in small groups in the medical curriculum, what kind of ideas they have and what are their teaching learning preferences. So to find out these preferences, we looked at what is the role of students, what according to them should be the role of students in these study groups, what should be the role of the group as such, what should be the role of the tutor of the group, and what should be the role of the medical school or curriculum. So on the basis of this, we actually found 4 profiles. Understanding-oriented students who had understanding-oriented preference for teaching learning, students who had assessment-oriented preference for teaching learning, group-oriented preference for teaching learning, and practice-oriented preference. So each of these profiles actually expected and wanted different things from a small group. The understanding-oriented profile had the idea that the role of students should be to develop a deep understanding of all aspects of medicine. And this was in contrast with the assessment-oriented profile because students wanted to learn what they needed to learn for assessments. Whereas the group-oriented profile wanted the small group to contribute to good atmosphere in the study and engage with peers on content. Whereas the practice-oriented profile wanted the small group to prepare them for future career in clinical practice. So they had different ideas on role of their own role, the study group role, or the role of the study group, the tutor's role, and the role of the medical school. This gave an idea what do the students expect from small groups. And then from this, we could hypothesize on what can the teachers do to help each of these profiles, because you have all these profiles in one group as a tutor, but how can you handle these students differently? So you can customize your teaching learning to different groups in the study. So this was my description of all the methods, but before I say thank you, I think I would like to show you the compare and contrast between these 3 methods. That would be my last slide. Yeah. So I have cluster analysis, then latent class analysis, and then Q-sort analysis. So the type of data which can be used in these studies, in these methods, a cluster analysis can use continuous as well as categorical data. Latent class analysis can use continuous as well as categorical data. And Q-sort analysis You need to have a combination of rank order statements, as I explained before, and interview data. So there is combination of quantitative and qualitative data. A required sample size for cluster analysis as a thumb rule should be more than 100. It should be good enough for cluster stability. Gradient class analysis needs to have medium size. It can handle medium size as well as large size samples. And Q-sort analysis can do both sample size, small or larger. And the quality of the sample, that means the differences in the people who you pick for the Q study, is more important than the quantity. The advantages of cluster analysis are it provides more generalizable findings. You can generalize it across populations, and longitudinal follow-up is possible for profiles. Whereas in a latent cluster analysis, there is flexibility of model specification. You can move, so it is not completely decided by the statistics, but you can decide it depending on what kind of profiles you get. Longitudinal follow-up is possible. Statistical and interpretational criteria for determining clusters, they are present, and researchers determine the number of classes and on the basis of an understandable solution and where you can see the latent factor, which describes the difference between classes. A Q-sort analysis is a robust and systematic way of studying subjectivity. It can be precise and rigorous, and yet it is the richness of the descriptive data. The disadvantages of cluster analysis: it may be random and not generate similar profiles in different samples. So if you repeat it, if you don't really look for cluster stability, in different samples, it might generate different profiles. A latent class analysis has limited generalizability, and sample size should not be too small, especially for a large number of indicators. And a Q-sort analysis has limited generalizability, and it is difficult to study longitudinal changes in profiles, change in profiles. So these are the advantages, disadvantages of the three methods. And here I would like to stop my presentation, and I would like to thank my team for this wonderful article and this experience that we had doing this as a team. Thank you.